Tonight we present a live broadcast of the Golden Age Radio Hour featuring L. Ron Hubbard's paranormal western entitled Shadows from Boot Hill. Be sure to tap on the follow button on this live video so that you're notified the next time we go live at the L. Ron Hubbard Theatre. Shadows from Boot Hill by L. Ron Hubbard. On a hot afternoon in August, Brazos chased his shadow toward Los Hornos at a speed which indicated that all the devils from hell and maybe even some angels were hot upon him. He fled with more fury than fright, for it seemed to him that the murder of a banker ought to be considered in the light of public good. 2, he nursed a feeling of grievance, for the law had been so swift and determined that he had not even had time to collect the $500 in double eagles, which was to have been his pay for the job. His buckskin money belt was light beneath his buckskin shirt, just as both peacemaker and rifle were empty at belt and saddle side. And this was a hell of a country to get lost in. And Los Hornos ahead was about as safe a sanctuary as a barrel of sidewinders. Brazos swore at his luck. He swore at his horse. Swore at his shadow. He cursed the sage. He cursed the dust. And he spat into the unoffending eye of a horned toad, by the way. If he had any good sense, he'd ride south to the border. But if he had any better sense, he'd crack a Wells Fargo safe before he went. For visitors in the land of the Dons were welcome in proportion to their purses. Los Hornos came writhing into sight amid its heat waves. Who did he know in Los Hornos? Only one man, Whisper Monahan. A slight shudder of premonition went over Brazos, and because he believed in premonition, he did not take the symptom in a good light. The last time he'd worked for Whisper Monahan, they had not parted the best of friends. But a posse is a posse, and a half-friend is better than an enemy with a gun smoke in his fist. And so Brazos went streaming into the main street of Los Hornos. There was a sign, Star Livery Stable, Whisper Monahan, proprietor. Brazos swung the horse, and the moist warmth and the dimness of the stable swallowed him. In the office, Whisper Monahan looked languidly at the opening door, and then came fully awake. For a few seconds, the silence was very deep. Whisper Monahan was awkward and scared as he seemed. He always got what he wanted, no matter the methods he had to use. Brazos was inclined to be truculent. He wasn't very tall, but he wasn't very thick either. And when men first looked at him, they thought him a forceful and powerful individual. His mouth was almost at a 45 degrees with his face, and his eyes proclaimed a dislike for the world. And now, with his shirt stained and his hat gray with dust and his much-used, if at present empty, gun at his side, he looked ready to take on a regiment, having just finished off a brigade.
Hello, Brazos.
Yeah, hello, Whisper.
You come far and fast, Brazos.
I come with half the citizens of Tullis on my heels.
Oh, well, now, Brazos, that's too bad. What happened?
I killed a gent that needed killing, and I didn't even collect the money. This country is going to hell for keeps.
Yeah, the law's getting the upper hand. Worse luck.
You gotta cover me, Whisper.
Why?
Because I said you gotta.
Whisper suddenly grinned inside himself.
Oh, that's too bad, Brazos. But I reckon you just better keep riding.
My horse is half dead, and I ain't gonna keep riding.
Then you just better keep walking, Brazos.
You can't do this to me.
You ain't got a cartridge left in your belt, and most likely none in your gun. You better be going, Brazos, afore them fellas come straking in here and string you up.
Oh, you can't do this to me.
I'm doing it, Brazos.
But they'll kill me.
Whisper was laughing inside himself now, though he looked very contrite and sorrowful. Brazos wore a silver cross on a silver chain around his neck, and when Brazos got pushed to it, he generally fingered the cross in hopes that it would bring him good luck. Whisper saw him doing it, and he knew that he had his man.
Too bad. You better be going before they get here.
Now, look, Whisper. Ain't you always been my friend?
Well, I've hired you once in a while.
Well, hire me again. I need the help. I need it bad.
Hire you? Shucks. I haven't got anything for you to do.
Sure you have, Whisper.
Whisper was hard put to keep looking thoughtful. Finally, he scrubbed at his head and spoke thoughtfully and doubtfully.
Well, I could get you to kill Scotty Brandt for me, but you wouldn't do that.
Oh, sure I would, Whisper. Oh, you're gonna help me.
Well, just as a favor to you, I'll let you do it. I'll even pay you $200 for it.
Oh, that's nice of you, Whisper. I knew you'd help me.
Whisper had won, and he threw off his lethargy. He
Henry!
called for his stable hand.
You saddle up beans and ride hell the leather for the buttes. About dark, you cut back, take the bed of the dead river to cover your trail, and come home.
About an hour later, Brazos was lying in the hayloft, not daring to breathe, while Whisper discovered, with shocked alarm, that he had aided the escape of a criminal.
Did he really? Well, I'm pretty sure I saw him heading out for the buttes.
But shortly, Brazos breathed again, for the posse, hot for blood, went thundering out of town on the trail of Beans and Henry, flailing their jaded mounts and licking their chops as they envisioned the riddled corpse of one Brazos. Whisper stood in the door watching them become a cloud of dust. Whisper, down inside, was laughing, but not at the joke he had played on the posse. Boot Hill at Los Hornos had recently acquired 2 new mounds, a civic improvement upon which grateful rattlesnakes now sunned themselves against the time when the grass would cover the mounds and crude crosses alike. Below the marker, which read Whiskey Pete, reposed a lately unlucky gunman who had the misfortune of finding his right arm paralyzed at the very instant when he should have been making the swiftest draw of his life. The other tombstone had no name at all, for this lead slinger had come from afar. He had also been exceedingly lacking in luck, for, to all appearances, he had gone loco blind and had placed 3 bullets through the front window of the Oven Saloon, when he had meant them to go cunningly into the region where Scotty Brandt's heart pumped Highland blood and whiskey through Scotty Brandt's wiry body. Thus, Whisper Monahan grinned. The citizenry of Los Hornos, with the air of art critics, had been much puzzled by the demise of these 2 gentlemen from other realms. In the first place, Scotty Brandt was slow and clumsy with a weapon. In the second place, Scotty Brandt had to fire twice to hit a barn, from the inside. In the third place, Scotty Brandt had not been at all worried when informed of either encounter to be. For the past 2 years, Scotty Brandt had been sitting at the headwaters of a rare stream, using a gentle chemical known as cyanide to extract gold from an oxide ore. And for the past 2 years, therefore, the entire valley, which was usually made green by the flow of that precious water, had been sudden death to all herds of sheep which might wander thereinto. Very early, diverse sheepmen had sought to cause the demise of one Scotty Brandt personally, and 3 of them had been buried in 3 months, thus establishing the project as one of those things which contained more danger than worth. Accordingly, and this is where Whisper Monahan fitted in, diverse sheepmen had been pleasantly willing to sell for a ridiculous price all the land bordering upon that stream, an area of some 4,000 acres. They had in mind the swindling of one Whisper Monahan, a man not ordinarily on the sucker side of any deal. Hence, when Whisper had dug down deep, laughing to himself, and had revived the deeds, he had promptly written to one Whiskey Pete, who, attracted by gain and not admiring the human race much, anyway, promptly took himself to Los Hornos, and nearly as promptly was given a 6-foot home with a nice view for rattlesnakes. The second man, not knowing about Whiskey Pete, who had also sought to soothe the itching of the palm, had come off missing the top of his head. Not to be intimidated, Whisper had written to a third and then a fourth lead slinger, but news travels swiftly, even when there are no wires, and Whisper Monahan found himself holding perfectly honest deeds to 4,000 acres of land, about as useful as a horned toad's toenails. That, of course, was the penalty for being honest for the first time in his life. You see, what made the problem so tough was not Scotty Brant, nor was it Swifty Brant, his son, even though Swifty could bend iron bars with his teeth and knock buttons off a shirt with his gun at 50 paces. According to the citizens of Los Hornos, no, it was Bilbo. About 9 o'clock that night, Whisper took Brazos over to the oven saloon via the back entrance and seated him at a table in the shadowy depths of the back. Scotty, Swifty, and Bilbo were seated near the front door as befitted members of the superior class of miners.
That him?
Said Brazos, looking with some amusement at the shriveled and harmless-looking little Scot.
That's him.
Brazos studied the group a while. He was not impressed by Scotty, but the big, heavy-looking youth with the truculent glare was more to Brazos' idea of menace.
Now that's Swifty Brant, the old man's kid. He's hell with a gun. He's been known to break a man's spine with his 2 hands.
Say, I thought there was just one you wanted dead.
That's right. Shh. Only you gotta get 2 in order to be safe killing the one. You gotta protect yourself, see?
Yeah? And who's the black man?
Before Whisper could answer, Bill Slocum, as usual, drunk, came lurching up to them and fell into a chair.
Any yours, Whisper?
Yes, that's a friend of mine.
And when he said, "Who's the black man?" was he talking about Bilbo?
Yeah.
Bill Slocum leaned over to Brazos in a confidential manner.
That ain't no black man. Just look at him, stranger.
Brazos looked. Bilbo was not sitting at the table with his employers. He was standing against the wall, regarding the room with an absent stare, as though involved in all manner of problems. Not that one regarded Bilbo closely. There was something odd about the man. He was wearing a pair of ragged jeans, but no shirt. About his throat hung a necklace of human teeth that gleamed dully. He was taller than either Scotty or Swifter, and he was very, very strong. There was a nobility about the man which not even Brazos could mistake. Why, the hombre even seemed to disdain his present company.
Just look at him, stranger. He was owned by that there Scotty Brant down in Louisiana before the war. He's just plain won't leave you, old man. He ain't no ordinary coffee gent, stranger.
Bill Slocum gave Bilbo a half-frightened glance and then lowered his voice even further.
I'll tell you what he is. He's a witch doctor. Voodoo. That's what it is, voodoo.
Yeah, go get yourself a drink. On me. Go on.
He's a witch doctor, that's what.
Said Bill Slocum, not moving except to take Whisper's personal drink and drink it down.
I was trying to get Scotty 2 years ago. Black magic. 3 fellers dead. Not a bullet in them.
That's a lie.
It's fact. There's hexed. And then what happened here last 2-3 months? Whiskey Pete came down here to shoot up Scotty Brant, and Whiskey Pete got out there in the street. When a young Swifty was around, Whiskey Pete and old Scotty drawed, and then what? Why, then there Bilbo kind of moved his hand like, and Whiskey Pete was paralyzed. Couldn't even draw. just stood there gaping. Let Scotty put 6 slugs in him. Bang, 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 bang. Now, and then another fella come down and he tried it from the same angle. As soon as he began to shoot at Scotty, old Bilbo made a motion with his hand. And the gunslinger went stone blind and shut up in front of his hair Stallone. And never even tried to hit Scotty. Of course, Scotty got him cold. Black magic. Black magic. Black magic. That's what. He is hexed. Witch doctor. Bilbo. Witch doctor.
And Slocum took himself away from there. For several seconds, Brazos fingered his silver cross, his mouth tight. Then he said,
No dice, Whisper. I ain't gonna do it.
Well, suit yourself, Brazos. Suit yourself. If you want that posse to pick you up when they come traipsing back here after losing Henry, well, that's your business.
Brazos sensed, rather than saw, the derringer which Whisper was holding under the table.
You ain't superstitious, are you, Brazos?
No. I ain't superstitious, Whisper.
Just get the brown man first, and then Swifty. Then you got Scotty.
All right, Whisper.
All right. Now, usually, they leave Bilbo in town to bring out the morning mail. About 1 o'clock, you slip around to the stable where Bilbo sleeps and give him a quick dose of lead. Got me, Brazos?
Yeah, sure.
Good.
Brazos, the color and texture of sun-baked brick, was not generally given to nerves. In fact, Brazos could generally look at an opponent and find bravado enough to grin a bit between shots. Brazos had been raised in a very dark school wherein a man dead was a man safe. And now all he had to do was use his expert skill to the end of putting 3 shots into 3 men, and he would collect $200 and be able to take himself southward over the border and beyond the reach of those who had objected so surprisingly to the demise of a mere banker. But somehow, cat-footing down the street, through the pre-dawn dark, toward the marked stable, Brazos did not in the least feel like grinning. His fingers time and again sought for the little silver cross at his throat. A silver cross, he argued now to himself, would certainly ward off anything so pagan and wicked as voodoo. Of course, he'd heard quite a bit about voodoo back in Louisiana, and maybe he had even put a little stock in it. But a silver cross, well, what the devil did he have to be afraid of from a mere witch doctor? And maybe the guy wasn't a witch doctor at all. Maybe he didn't have a thing to do with the fate which had overtaken the 5 men who had attempted the life of Scotty Brant and son. Maybe this Brant was pretty fast and furious with a gun and just played clumsy to cover it up. Certainly, Scotty Brant had all the nerve there was, sitting at the headwaters of a creek and wrecking the water supply of a whole valley with this blasted cyanide. Sure, it was Scotty Brant. Or was it? The stable loomed like a cube of coal against the brilliant stars. A desert wind, chill as mountain water, was making little sighing sounds through the chinks in the walls. This was a very easy job. All he had to do was step inside. A horse was munching thoughtfully at his manger. At the back of the place, another restlessly stamped. Gentle snores emanated from a box stall, spotting the sleeping man. Brazos' hand sought the silver cross for one last reassuring touch, and then dipped into his pocket for a match. It wouldn't do to go killing the wrong man. On silent boots, he advanced upon the stall. The hinges of the door creaked, and some oats scattered on the floor, wind brushed back, made a grating sound. The horse snorted, and then went on eating. A pale star gleamed through a hole in the roof, sending down the faintest possible beam to the reposed face of the snoring man. Brazos sought to strike the match against the seat of his pants and was immediately disgusted with himself for the way he was shaken. What was wrong with him? All he had to do was kill the man. He'd heard somewhere that gunmen usually got themselves a violent case of nerves toward the end of their career. Maybe he was getting those same nerves. Now, it couldn't be because this man was a witch doctor. But that was just local talk, that witch doctor business. He wouldn't take any stock in that. Hell no. He struck the match. In the leaping flare of it, Bilbo started up, hand instantly clenched about the hilt of a cane knife, teeth gleaming. Brazos fired. Bilbo swung the knife so fast it shrieked. Brazos fired again. Black hands clutched at Brazos' shirt, and the knife clattered down at one end of the stall. The match was out, but Brazos couldn't miss his target. 3 times, close together, he stabbed the muzzle of the peacemaker deep into the hard black body and pulled the trigger. The reports were muffled. The black hands contracted on Brazos' throat with fury.
I'll get you, white man. I'll get you.
With a hoarse rattling sound, Bilbo slumped down to the center of the stall. His hands, when Bilbo lighted a second match, were still contracting and releasing convulsively, and the jaw was still working. And in the air there seemed to hover the words,
I get you, white man.
Brazos, trembling so that he could hardly move, fumbled his way out of the stable, half crawled and half ran through the sand. Quivering in every muscle, he flung himself gasping in the protection of a sage and stared with haunted eyes in the direction of the stable 200 yards away.
I get you, white man.
God in heaven. A bullet through the skull on the first shot. A bullet through the heart. And still fighting. 3 bullets in the stomach, so close that the odor of seared flesh still clung in his nostrils.
I get you, white man.
Brazos shakingly fingered his cross. At the funeral, only 2 men had anything to say, although half the town attended. Sheepherders, a few punchers, 4 miners, and Scotty and Son filled the audience. The local undertaker and the preacher went through their motions with mechanical precision born of much practice, and so the blanket-wrapped corpse of Bilbo was lowered into the red earth of the hilltop. Brazos, feeling oddly uncomfortable, was across the circle from Whisper. Just why Brazos had come was a puzzle to Brazos himself, but he had come, and now he was very busily telling himself that dead men were dead men, and that Bilbo was about the deadest corpse he had ever seen. The spectators had just begun to straggle away when Scotty Brant hooked his thumbs into his cartridge belt and bent a pale old eye upon his boy, who was about a foot taller than he.
You have any idea who might have done this, Swifty?
Swifty spat tobacco juice near the boot of a sheepherder and then looked around at the crowd, which had now paused. Swifty's big muscles bulged as he flexed his arms carelessly. The wind was in his blond hair, and his not unhandsome face was very hard. His boots were planted so solidly that he himself appeared to be growing up out of the earth itself.
No, I ain't got any idea, Pop. But all I got to say is, God help whoever did it.
If Swifty had suggestively rested a hand on the butt of his gun when he said it, it would have had far less effect. But Swifty didn't appear to be talking about anything he and Pop would do. He seemed to be drawing up vengeance from a source which was now being covered up with red earth and hard stones. And Swifty looked all around and down into the grave, and then took Scotty by the arm and led him toward their horses. Their flat-heeled miners' boots made the only sound. When they had gone, the spectators straggling down the ugly hill buzzed with wonder. Brazos, in their midst, tried not to listen. Why the devil had he come to this funeral anyhow? Chattering old women, that's what they were. Magpies. One was saying that it must have took an awful lot of nerve to kill a witch doctor. And another was saying, yes, there's no telling what a ghost of a witch doctor might do. And somebody else was whispering about curses and spells and 5 men dead. Brazos gradually worked himself into a fury against such blather. It was as if they were trying to scare him to death on purpose. Well, let him try. He wouldn't scare. That Swifty might be 8 feet tall for all he cared. He'd salted down gents that had more on the powder than that Swifty. Besides, what did he have to fear from a pink-faced kid? Let him talk, and to hell with him. Brazos wouldn't scare, and that was all there was to it. Amen. Having goaded himself into a state of stubborn determination, very little could have affected him, even the strange thing which he was about to notice. At first, he merely sensed someone walking a little behind him and to his right. Well, what of it? There were a lot of people walking through the weeds down this hill. Probably Whisper wanted to catch up with him and make sure he wasn't losing his nerve. That thought caused him to whirl about with an angry statement ready. But there wasn't anyone walking behind him, nor to his right or his left.
So I am getting spooky.
And thereupon he refortified his determination to stay as calm as an oyster. Still, there was that feeling that somebody was walking behind him and to his right. Well, to hell with it. He wouldn't give them the satisfaction of looking. Say, what the hell? Well, this was a nutty one. He had 2 shadows. Somebody had sneaked up behind him after all. So thinking, he halted and looked all around. But he was very much alone, having drawn farther than ever from the main crowd. And yes, there was Whisper, walking between the preacher and the undertaker, nearly 100 yards away. He put his back to the sun and looked at the earth. 2 shadows, his own and... say, what the hell is this all about anyway? He moved his right arm and his own shadow moved. The other one did not. He tipped his hat a trifle, and his own shadow did the same. Still, the other did not move. It just lay there, a little to the right of his own, a dark black patch upon the whiteness of the sand, not moving, not doing anything, but standing there. Experimentally, Brazos took a few steps forward. The second shadow went right along with him. Brazos stopped. His own shadow stopped. The other shadow stopped. Brazos inspected the thing carefully. It wasn't like the kind of shadow that is thrown by a man who had 2 light sources behind him, the kind which starts out in separate direction from the one set of feet. No, this was quite independent of Brazos so far as source was concerned, and there was something else about it. Its shape was indeterminate, lacking any definite outline beyond the vague outline of a man. For a moment he pondered. For an instant he felt a growing surge of terror inside himself, and then he wrapped his fingers around his silver cross and got mad.
Get the hell out of the way!
The second shadow just stood there.
Grab leather!
And though he made as if to charge it, it kept standing right there.
To hell with it,
said Brazos, and with a grand air of indifference went strolling off toward the town, resisting the impulse to look at it. A man's eyes, however, take in considerable territory, and there he could see it, no matter if he didn't look at it. Suddenly he whipped off his hat and threw it. The hat kicked up a little dust, rolled over, and was still. He reached gingerly across the second shadow and retrieved his headgear. Replacing it, he went on down toward the town. He didn't know what it was. He doubted his chances of finding out. All right, he had 2 shadows. But only one did things when he did things. All right, to hell with the second shadow. If it thought he was going to go loco, it had another think coming.
Go to hell!
He spat at the dark splotch, but he was ever so slightly disconcerted when the thing jerked aside, avoiding the tobacco juice.
Well, go to hell anyway! I don't scare. You see?
But he felt a little funny about it now from a self-conscious point of view. A fine thing to go walking around with two shadows. Gents would kid him. If they knew he was good for him, he'd stay in the shade. As soon as he got to the edge of the town, he followed his plan. It was a relief to see the second shadow go as soon as there ceased to be sun. And not having scared, Brazos swanked a trifle to himself. He pretended not to notice that his course toward the Star livery stable was circuitously plotted so as to keep him in the shade. A difficult course, for he had to go in at the side door, sun shining full in the front door.
That you, Bezos?
Yep.
Whisper had seated himself in the main doorway, but now he swiveled around and peered into the gloomy quiet of the stable.
What you doing?
Fixing my saddle.
Well, let it go. The sheriff wants to talk to you.
Brazos unwillingly edged toward the sunlight at the front of the building. He came to the last outpost of darkness and paused, still several feet from the visitors.
Well, come on!
What do you want to give me, sunstroke?
The sheriff's right here, and he's got a few things to say to you. Sheriff?
You Brazos?
Yeah.
Know anything about that, Bilbo?
Nope.
The sheriff glanced at his two deputies and for an instant seemed uncomfortable. Indeed, the way Brazos' mouth slanted off at the look in Brazos' eyes and the compact, self-assured way he had of standing, an attitude which seemed battlesome, he took some authority from the sheriff's voice.
Oh, he's just checking up, and you being a stranger and...
Yeah. That's all right. No hard feelings.
Huh? I mean, yeah, no hard feelings. Come on, boys.
And they went away. And Brazos promptly moved back into the livery stable, Whisper tagging him.
What's the matter with you?
You got that 200 in cash?
Well, sure, but what?
Well, you're a coming along with me to pay off.
Me? When?
Right now.
Hey, wait a minute, Bezos. There ain't no call to rush this thing. The brands will be all keyed up and ready to fight. Hell, Bezos, I'm no good when it comes to throwing lead.
You're saying it. But you are to the good on throwing cash, and I want you handy.
He got busy saddling a roan and was definitely in no mood to argue the point. It was a very hot afternoon, and Whisper sighed at the thought of a sweaty, gritty gallop, but he was also thinking about the thick sheaf of deeds which would become valid and useful as soon as he saw the Brants safely over the border into the happy hunting ground where all would be pay dirt. Whisper called to Henry for a horse, and presently he and Brazos were trotting along the road which led to the Highland Queen mine. Brazos was being very quiet. For one thing, he had to keep close rein on his thoughts. For another, he didn't like talking to Whisper anyway. The second shadow was there to plague him, for someone or something was apparently riding the lone roan with him. Brazos nursed a feeling of outraged pride that a shadow would come along and attach it to himself in so careless a fashion, and he nursed that pride carefully, for with increasing frequency, he thought that Bilbo caused this thought for recognition. Bilbo, to hell with Bilbo. A dead man was harmless. And what if it was Bilbo? What if it was Bilbo's shadow? Bilbo's shadow. Say, that'd be a funny one. They buried Bilbo, but they didn't bury his shadow, and now the shadow had to attach itself to another hombre. Brazos' quirt fell suddenly and viciously, and the roan spurted ahead. Why, think about it. To hell with it. To hell with Bilbo, and to hell with the Brants, and to hell with Whisper Monahan. He'd show the whole crew. He'd show them if he could buffalo him. Sure, it was Bilbo's shadow. It wasn't wearing either a hat or a shirt, and below the shadow of the roan, the ragged ends of the jeans could be seen to flap. Brazos slowed down and steadied himself. Now, this was no way to act. Why had he speeded up that way? Oh, well, so Whisper wouldn't notice his second shadow and comment on it. That was the reason. Well, Whisper was starting to sweat lard in this heat, and his mind was on his tender sensibilities. What the hell did it matter if Whisper did see the second shadow? Rage, like the glowing end of a fuse, was beginning to eat its way nearer the powder keg of his temper. He'd ride hard and get to the Highland Queen, and about the same time as the Brants. They wouldn't be expecting to bushwhack so close to Bilbo's death. Then he'd make Whisper come across with the 200 and maybe a bonus, and then scorch trail for the border. Somehow it seemed to him that if he got the two Brants, that shadow would desert him. He had to be certain of that. Nah, sure, it'd leave him.
Hey, what's the hurry?
Along the distance which steadily grew between them,
I got 2 funerals to do!
they were coming into broken country now. Brazos could see the defiled stream off to his left, a glass thread wandering off to be soaked up by the greedy desert. At the head of it would be the Highland Queen, and if he began to take game trails through these broken canyons which led that way, he would come in upon the mine at its flank. Whisper had already outlined the country to him. Brazos had a deep instinct for such things. His timing should be perfect, for he was riding the roan for all it had, and he had seen how leisurely the Brants had begun their return. Get this over, he told himself. Get this over and rid of the shadow and depart this land so fast the jackrabbits would be jealous and the trail would smoke. Whisper finally became a dust cloud behind him, and then nothing. Ahead, backed by a perpendicular palisade of multicolored rock, the Highland Queen came into sight. It was a shaft in the cliff like a bullseye on a target. A scattering of weathered buildings, a white and yellow dump leading down to the street, a couple mule cars, and a stamp mill, which at first glance looked extraordinarily like a gallows, complete with criminals and chains. Only one man was in sight, lying in the shade of the cook shack, legs crossed and playing upon a harmonica for his own amusement. Brazos drew up. He had approached from the upper trail, and now he was 50 or 60 feet above the level of the mine, standing in the bed of a stream which had once fed the main creek in years past. From this place, he could command the entire mine and the trail which led into it from town. He swung down, and he tethered his roan to the breeze, pulled his Henry from its saddle boot and inspected its load. And then, selecting a rock which was screened by a sage, he climbed up and prepared to wait. He refused to pay any attention at all to the shadow, even though it stayed very close to him, even though it quite apparently had a smooth, round head and was very strong and wore nothing but ragged jeans. To hell with it. As soon as he got the Brants, the thing had vanished, so why worry about it now? He estimated his range to the trail as 175 yards and set his sights accordingly. It annoyed him to find that his hands were shaking. He ought to have brought a drink along to steady him. Still, 175 yards was an easy range. That trail along which the Brants would come stretched without cover for nearly an eighth of a mile. Of course, there was a dip on the other side of it, for it followed the near side of a gully, but he knew, if anything, about this quarry. If he knew them at all, they'd speed up in an effort to make the mine itself rather than pile off into the dirt and take cover. Besides, they were just miners, not fighting men. He looked around for Whisper, found the shadow lying beside him. He made an annoyed brushing motion at it, but it did not stir. Where was Whisper? I guess he got cold feet, thought Brazos. Well, he'd be handy when the shooting was over. He'd better be. The waiting tried him almost beyond endurance. Why the hell didn't... Oh, there they were. There they were, riding into sight, wholly oblivious about what was waiting for them when they got midway on that trail. This was more like it. He was taking a chance, of course, because one of them might possibly drop into the gully and start banging away. And if that happened, there would be men with guns at the mine to smoke at him from that angle. But if he shot fast and true, he didn't have anything to worry about. The men at the mine wouldn't attempt a battle if their two bosses were dead, for even if they did, they'd lack leadership, and a few well-placed shots would drive them back. They were the Brants, jogging along at an even pace. Brazos couldn't have asked for anything better. He'd lead them by their own wits, and that would just about land the shots true. The sun had heated up the barrel of the carbine, but if it had actually burned him, it's doubtful he would have noticed. Generally, when he came this near the kill, he was as calm as a buzzard. Usually this sort of thing had a steadying effect upon him, but now he... He was somewhat surprised when he drew his bead on Swifty to find that Swifty was wobbling. No, it wasn't Swifty that was wobbling, it was his rifle. What the hell was wrong with him? Shaking with a gun in his hands? It's impossible. Not Brazos. And yet Swifty's image persisted in jumping about beyond the black explanation point of the sight. Steady, Brazos told himself. Steady. He moved his arm so that his elbow had better support. But even that didn't help matters much. Was he getting old or something? Well, he couldn't try to hold that bead all day. He'd catch Swifty's image as it went by, and white powder smoke bloomed before him, and he jacked another cartridge into the heated breech. As soon as the smoke cleared, he saw Swifty's horse, riderless, careening insanely toward the bunkhouses. Well, that was better. Old Scotty's mount was rearing, wheeling on its hind legs and screaming. That was a weird one, but Brazos was in no mood to ask himself questions that just then. He drew a bead on Scatty Brunt. The target could not be anticipated. So sudden was its movement, and Brazos found that his gun still shook. And then calamity. Old Scotty went off his horse like a catapulted rock and vanished into the gully. Smoke from the gully. Bang from the rifle Scotty had fired. Maybe the old fool wasn't a bad fighter after all, thought Brazos uneasily. He had stayed his mount long enough to pull his gun from the saddle boot. That must have taken nerve. He saw rock chips fly from the road before his own smoke obscured his view. That'd keep the fool down. His brass empty tinkled musically upon the stone as he jacked another cartridge, and no dust this time. Bang! Right through the old man's smoke, exulted Brazos. Now, if that shot hadn't hit him, then he'd better stick to playing stud poker for the rest of his life and leave shooting to others. No, he'd wait now and find out. Puffs of smoke were coming from the bunkhouse, and Brazos bethought himself that the top of this rock was nothing to hold for fire from that direction, so he scrambled back, dropping to the dirt at the rock's edge, from which point he could keep an eye on the trail. Still, maybe he hadn't gotten Swifty. Best thing to do was back out of this and make a circuit of the mine and get a look down that ditch. Then he'd collect his 200 and... Brazos rolled under the edge of the rock and peered back up. Who the devil was shooting at him? And why? He'd heard no passage of bullets, though. Whisper. Sure. The old gink was going to cover his retreat. Well, thought Brazos. Didn't think the old gink had it in him. Those 3 shots must have done some good, for the 3 rifles in the bunkhouse ceased firing. Maybe old Whisker had done some good after all. Experimentally, Brazos slithered out of his concealment and up through the sage toward his waiting horse. As soon as he was covered up from the mine by the rocks, he stood up, and he stood up to a shock. He had 3 shadows. His own, Bilbo's, and yet another. The new one was of vague size. It didn't focus well. He was conscious of alternate waves of heat and chills sweeping up and down his spine. He felt his palms grow slippery. The band of his hat was suddenly hot, so he took his hat off. His own shadow took off its hat, but the other two just stood there. He walked forward. They walked forward with him. He stopped. They stopped. He forced down a wild craving to mount his horse and run.
Go to hell!
Said Brazos, starting toward the horse.
You go to hell, both of you! I don't scare, see? Got that? I don't scare!
2 shadows now. One was Bilbo's, the other... sure, the other one was Swifty's. Vague, but... so he'd gotten Swifty.
You ain't nothing to brag about.
He told the new shadow.
I knocked you off your damn horse like you was so much scarecrow. And if I'm good enough to get both of you, then damned if I'm gonna be scared by your shadows. Go on! Get off and crawl in a hole! I don't scare! See?
Truculently, he mounted his roan. He had to finish this job. As soon as he got Scotty as well, these things would vanish. Maybe. Well, what if they didn't vanish? 3 shadows instead of 1 couldn't worry him. Hell, even if they showed themselves as getting on his horse with him, yes. Well, yeah, and there they were, 1 before and 1 behind.
Go to hell!
Said Brazos, and he turned his horse down the back trail. There was no more firing from the bunkhouse or from the cliffs on his own side. He guessed Whisper would be waiting for him around the bend. Well, he'd just scout that mine again and make sure Scotty. Shucks, why hadn't he thought of that before? He'd nicked Scotty. Well, sure he had, and most likely in the head. And so Scotty was probably kicking out his life in that ditch over there. Well, he'd have to make sure, and as soon as he did, he'd collect from Whisper and get himself lost to Mexico. Sure. He'd make Whisper come around to the other side of the mine, and he'd show him the bodies, and all would be well. As soon as the old man kicked out his last, why, these shadows would have to vanish. But maybe they wouldn't vanish.
Go to hell. Soon as the old man joins you, that'll be the end of you. I said so!
He rode along the stream bed on the watch for Whisper. He'd take him around to the other side. What the devil was that in the trail? He stood in his stirrups and gazed steadily, but all he could see was a dark something fluttering in the hot wind. It was obscured by two rocks in such a way that he'd have to come nearly upon it before he could make it out. An alarm gong began to resound in the back of his brain. His hands on the reins shook and tightened until the roan bucked and backed and white-eyed tried to buck.
Nerves.
There were the three shadows, his own and two more, Bilbo and Swifty. Bilbo and Swifty dead, and here he was getting the shakes like a man after a 10-day drunk. What were a couple of extra shadows? He'd show them he couldn't be scared. And he set his mouth and hardened his unholy eyes and dug spur. The dark thing possessed itself of a pair of vaguely familiar legs. And then a hat could be seen lying with a partly reddened brim a few feet beyond the first rock. Way down the canyon, a horse was calmly grazing. Brazos reined viciously beside the body and looked down. Cloudy as were his thoughts, strained as his vision, he could still not mistake this corpse, blown away through the face, though it might be. Whisper Monahan. Oh, what the devil. The roan shied away from the body, and Brazos fought to keep control, but he fought with little cunning and assurance, and his spurs betrayed him. He rolled in the dust, and the roan went thundering away down the canyon. And away Brazos came to his knees with a curse and wiped the dust from his eyes. Something glinted behind a boulder above him, and he stiffened. There was something familiar about that face. Behind that barrel, a sound grated in back of him, and he spun about to see another head behind another rock. Something familiar here. He put out his hand to steady himself, and he touched the soft corpse of Whisper Monahan. Not until then did he know what happened to him. There had been Bilbo's shadows, but the third had not been Swifty's. Not Swifty's at all, but that of Whisper Monahan. Brazos remembered now how it had been elusive in size and shape. Brazos knew with sudden starkness that his fear-crazed bravado had deceived himself.
I get you, white man.
Elusive, hammering, torturing words, damning him. Brazos. Bilbo's shadow. Where was it now? Where had it gone? That thing which had unnerved him until he couldn't shoot and couldn't think. Where it had gone? He stared up at the living Swifty and saw the gun flame. He swiveled half around and a .44 mingled through his chest from Scotty Brandt's gun. His hands clutched meaningless scoops of hot, gritty sand, and the world began to tip crazily. Bilbo's shadow was gone. Whisper Monahan's shadow was gone. With merciless accuracy, the two rifles crashed out again and again as he screamed in pain, butchering him. His own shadow was gone.